long story short, turns out I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease. And then also, we have the theory that obviously you process your grief in your liver, and maybe that has something to do with it. But there's just all these health repercussions, like physical things that can happen while you're grieving. And I think your body is just responding to this overwhelming mental state that you're in, and your body physically reacts.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. I'm so happy to be chatting with Kristina Cunningham today. Kristina is a mom of 3, and one of her kids is Mason, who will be the focus of our conversation today. Kristina and her friend Steffanie started a blog / YouTube channel / podcast, Instagram, a lot of things. We'll talk about that too, called Sunflowers and Red Feathers, in honor of their journey after Mason, Kristina's son, and then Steffanie, her son, Joshua, passed away. And so we'll be talking about all things that have occurred since as well as before, and a little bit about that journey of motherhood and of life and so forth. So welcome, Kristina.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Thank you. And we, again, as always, I always do with my guests, I start having these conversations pre-recording that I'm like, wait, let's keep it for the podcast. So we'll keep it for the podcast. So let's start off with just the getting to know each other, because I was on your podcast, but I didn't really get to really know you guys because you guys were asking the questions to me. So now I get the honor of asking you questions. And is this the first time you're solo, or are you guys usually together? Is this the first time you're doing something solo?
I think we've only had one other person interview us, and we were together. So this is first solo.
Well, good. Is it anxious, nervous, excited, both? How does it feel when you're not have your partner in crime?
My partner.
Yeah, your co-host
I'm
and
not
friend.
necessarily nervous. I think I was actually more nervous for the other one because we were going to take turns doing our stories, and I was like, I don't want to go second because I'll already be crying from hearing Steffanie talk, so there was that. But no, I'm not anxious. We're pretty used to this. So
I know. I tell my kids anytime they're like, I'm nervous. And I'm like, well, you know what? Just nervousness and excitement have the same reaction and feeling in the body. So if you just tell your brain you're excited, then it's different. If you just use the words
That's good
excited,
advice.
because in general it is, right? You still get like the jitty,
The
you still get the
endorphins
butterfly. Yeah. So it's still the
Mhm.
same. So it's only really like a change in even just the word, but what's happening in the body is pretty much the same. I've heard the only difference of excitement and nervousness is breath. Something like that. It's just the change. Something like if you just it's just the breath pattern is just a little different. I don't know. But
Interesting.
yeah, but I'm happy to have you. Okay, so you live in
Nampa, Idaho.
Nampa. And let's just say that again, because Nampa, Nampa, Idaho. She said
Yes.
Nampa earlier, and I thought she was saying Napa. So Nampa, Idaho.
No, we're just outside of the capital of Idaho, so about 20 minutes from Boise.
Okay. Is that west, more towards
West.
Washington State? More towards
Yep.
Washington? Okay.
Yeah.
I've been to Boise, so I might have gone through Nampa.
Mhm.
So tell us then, how long have you lived? Is this where you grew up?
I was born in Boise, and then I grew up like 10 minutes out in Meridian, and then now I'm 10 minutes farther out in Nampa. So I've been in Nampa probably the last 10 years or so, my adult years.
You know.
Yeah.
So you're a young mom of three, and did you get married really young then? And what's your husband's name? Tell us a little bit about that and how you guys met and then your journey of parenthood.
Oh gosh. Well, we have kind of a cute story of how we met. We actually
I
met when we
love that.
were when we were kids. So he grew up in a really, really small town called Cascade, and it's just up in the mountains. And his mom was a single mom, and so she was working and would bring her kids with her to work at this church camp called Faith Heights. And I grew up down here. We say in the valley, a valley kid. And my church went to Faith Heights like for a summer, like a summer camping trip, and that's how I met my husband. So we played like all weekend. I kicked his butt after his ball, and then we didn't know it for like our entire childhood that our parents, my mom and his mom, actually knew each other, went to school together. And anyways, we reconnected as adults when I was 21, and we were like, wait, we could have like been talking this whole time, like our moms know each other. So anyway, that's when we started dating. We got married a couple years later, so we're just about to have our 8-year anniversary. So,
Oh,
and his name is
wonderful.
Wade. Yeah,
Wade. So your husband
yeah,
Wade. And then so you're about to be married for 5 years. So then tell us
8 years.
when 8 years, sorry, 8 years. So then tell us how it was when you guys started then planning your family. Was it
Yeah.
surprise? Was it planned? I mean,
Oh
we
no,
plan.
every single
I say
baby has been
planned,
planned.
but oh, you okay,
No,
okay.
it really is. I am like an OCD over the top planner. So every single child, like everything has been planned. So a couple years into our marriage, we decided to kind of settle down. We were the only ones in our friend group who were even like dating anybody, and then we got married, and now we're like talking about kids, and our friends are all like, "What? Like we still party all the time and live with our
What
parents, you know?" So
yeah. Were you guys in college or you go straight to work? Did you guys go straight to working?
no, I was already graduated, and my husband was working, so we were just
Uh-huh.
working full time and hanging with our friends. We're like, there's got to be more to life than this, you know? So around that time, we also started looking for like a church home. And so I got pregnant and we found our little church home and have been there ever since. So,
Oh, wonderful. Now, when
yeah.
you say with your church home, meaning
hmm
your community, the church community that you were going to be a part of?
I mean,
Or
I
you
say
mean church
home as
home?
in like they're my family. Like
Got
they're
it. Yeah.
very important to us. Yeah.
To you guys. Now, do you is this the same kind of church that you had grown up in or just a
Um,
different denomination or some, same
yeah,
denomination but just a,
a
just
different,
a different
yeah,
space.
it's a
Okay.
local church here in Nampa. hmm
Okay. And so you found that then you had your first child. And so who and when yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, that was Mason. So
Mason.
Mason was
Okay.
born December of 2015.
What's
And we were
Mason's birthday? December what?
20th. Almost
Oh,
Christmas. Yeah, they were gonna
that's my
induce him if he
dad's
didn't come by Christmas.
birthday. That's
Yeah,
my
oh
dad's
yeah.
birthday.
I
I think,
remember.
yeah. Okay, so December 20th of 2015. And then um tell us how it was then his birth.
Oh, well, his birth was like the easiest ever. No, nothing really crazy there. Only natural delivery. Everything else from after that has been a hot mess. But so he was simple, easiest baby, joyful from the get-go, just light of everybody's life.
Thank you. Isn't it incredible how it's sometimes even the those joyful moments that bring more of that emotion sometimes and even sharing sometimes the grief component of the situation. It's the joy that we end up kind of sometimes choking up and sharing. Have you noticed that when you've done your post
Oh yeah.
podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, and that word joy is I didn't even realize how special it was going to be to me. It's actually a part of what I put on his headstone. I can't even remember, but I used joy there, and it just is a word that has stuck because he was like the physical embodiment of joy.
Oh, I got chills.
Yeah, even from the time he was born, he has my sister-in-law was pregnant at the same time, and so her daughter was born about 2 months after Mason, and so it was a blessing because we both were in the same stage of life at the same time, and she is 5 now, and she has just been a spitfire from the get-go. Like she was I remember one of the first times we all got together with my husband and I and Mason and those two, and her name's Elizabeth, when they were babies. Like Mason was just so calm, so quiet, so like collected, and his joyful self. And then there was Ellie, and she was just screaming bloody murder all the time. I just looked at my sister-in-law and I'm like, I am so sorry. Like if Mason was like that, I don't know how I would handle, like, God knows what you can handle, right? But she is just he was just so calm. Like from the beginning, I just remember being he's such an easy baby. Everybody would always say he's so easy, he's so happy, he's so happy, just joyful.
Hmm.
So yeah.
And then did you go on then to become a parent then before you went to have your second child? How old
hmm
was Mason at that time?
So I was 10 weeks pregnant when Mason died. So
Okay.
Mason was 19 months and I was 10 weeks pregnant with my
Okay.
second, Noah.
So, do you want to share the circumstances around Mason's passing, or would you like to just share? Do you want to share how he passed away, or do you want to share more the after?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I won't go into too much
No,
detail. If you want to
please
listen, you
don't.
can listen
Yeah,
to our
please don't.
podcast
Yeah.
episode. But basically, we live next door to my parents. They built a house. They bought this huge, beautiful house that had an extra lot next door, and they decided to build a house on it and asked me if my family wanted to move in there as soon as we found out we were pregnant with Mason. And we're like, yeah, that'd be great. Like she had an in-home daycare. It'd be perfect. I could just walk Mason next door and go to work. And anyway, so it was like our family retirement, huge like dream home plan. Because the ultimate plan was because there was a 3-story house my parents lived in, and then they built just a 1-story smaller home. And so that our goal was as my family grew and they got to retirement age, we would swap houses and we would just like live there forever. Like that was our goal.
Ah.
It was great. But so we like walk out the back door and there's farmland everywhere. And it was just this beautiful creek that ran behind all of the houses. And it was like the creek was like my happy place. Like that's where I would go and like gather my thoughts, just get outside, and that's where Mason died. It was a couple weeks before he died that we did like our big announcement that I was pregnant with Noah, and I wanted to take him down because I bought him a shirt that said, "Can you dig it? I'm going to be a big brother." And I was like, "Oh, we should have him digging in the dirt, and I'll take these cute pictures." And so we went down to the creek, and he had these little shovel, and he was digging in the dirt, and it was super cute. And that was the first, I think, first or second time. Like, you'd only taken him down there a couple of times because it was very fast moving, like it wasn't safe at all. But we were both there, my husband and I, and so yeah, that experience with the creek, and then the day that he died was a Tuesday, and he was at daycare, of course, because I was working. My husband was working, and my mom went with all the daycare kids, took them to this little local reservoir, and they played in the water all day long. And Mason just loved it. He had a blast. He loved water, and so the day that he died, I was having like a jewelry party at my house with all my mom, my sister, our girlfriends, and we were next door at my house, and all the men were at my parents' house. Um, and so it was my father, my husband, and my brother-in-law, and Mason, all the guys. And I honestly, to this date, don't really know exactly what happened, other than a gate was left open and we couldn't find Mason. So he was actually a missing child pretty much the whole first night. It was about 8 o'clock when we realized that all the guys were gone. Nobody was home. We couldn't figure out where they went. And we're like, well, that's strange. All the cars are here. And we all got in cars. Some went to the hospital. Some started driving around. And basically, it just came to be that, he was gone. My husband was missing until about 10 o'clock that night because we ended up finding out had jumped in the creek, was trying to find Mason. And he got out about, I can't remember, at least 2 miles downstream and went to somebody's house, was in shock, and they called the cops, and that's when the ambulance found him. And so, anyways, Mason was missing that whole night, and we started looking for him again at 6 a.m. And once morning came and light came, they sent out um, people to get into the water and helicopters to look over the land. And that's when they found his body at about 10 o'clock the next morning. So,
Christina, thank you for sharing that. And I know how hard it is. I didn't know because I had not asked because I figured when we had had communication before that that if that's something that you wanted to share, like in our texts and stuff, that you would. So that's why I asked
Yeah,
if you wanted to share. But I think that it's important to some extent too, because sometimes just the how somebody passes away, somebody else might relate to that. And just as parents, we know that little things like that happen all the time. I remember losing my kid at the zoo, things like that, like, like little
yeah,
split
that's all it
seconds of
takes.
things, all it takes. Um, and it's, thank you. Thank you as hard as that was. But I'm just thinking again back to that word joy that you said and him having spent the day at the reservoir and
Yeah,
him wanting to continue his fun. My, like,
that's all I can think is that he's like, oh, this is water, this is fun. We just did this all day and just, was drawn to it. I don't know,
yeah.
that's what I assume, but
Yeah, I know. It's just harder to when you don't know the details because then we end up like kind of creating then the storyline to fill in the blanks that we don't know, right? And whatever
exactly.
storyline we create, it's valid to each of us that do that based on the circumstances if it brings any kind of comfort, to have some kind of
Yeah,
storyline.
yeah.
So, fast forward then to you then here you are pregnant 10 weeks. You had not fully done the announcement yet. You had taken the pictures, but you had
Oh
not
no,
done the you had
yeah,
already
I
done the
shared it
announcement.
that day. Yeah,
Oh, okay,
the
you
day
had
we
done
took
the
pictures.
announcement. Okay. So what part of the journey do you want to share next? What part do you want to share next? Would you like to share how you guys the the memory part? Would you like to, memory of his passing, and how did you celebrate his life after his passing, or would you like to fast forward to even just your journey of grief and your through your pregnancy as well?
Whatever you want. I'm an open
Okay.
book.
Okay. Well, I just
Yeah,
want to respect that space for you too, because it's so much. And every time, of course, of talking, I want to make sure that it's something that you want to talk about as well. So,
yeah.
um,
No,
uh,
anything's fine.
okay. So when did you have the service, and what did you have it? Did you have people come over to your home? And what were some of the things that you felt in those few weeks, if you even remember of anything? Because I'm sure a lot of times we're just kind of in this, zombie kind of mode, kind of going through the motions of the shock. So, of what you remember of those first few days and weeks, what were some of the things surrounding his passing that helped in that comfort?
Yeah, I am very lucky in the aspect that I had so much support. Like the night that he went missing, my mom's first instinct was to call, the church, and so our pastor and our um, the lead pastor and the guy below him, I don't know what his title is, but they all came out and they were, praying and there with us until about midnight and stuff. And so we had all of this support from basically our whole church. And people set up meal trains and they were just like, what do you need? And so we had, since my house was just next door, like I pretty much woke up and just went to my parents' house for a couple of weeks. And there was somebody always there. Family came from another small town called Gooding and had my niece and nephew. And anyways, we were just surrounded by lots of support and people. And they brought food and toilet paper and stuff that you don't really think that you're gonna need. But really, when you have that many people like visiting all the time, I mean,
True. What a
you
good one
needed
to
toilet
add.
paper.
Toilet paper, you guys.
Yeah,
That's so true because if
and
people are going
tissues.
in and out of and tissues, great tip. That's a great
Yeah.
tip. I would have never thought of that. But yeah, you're right. Like that's something you run out of probably food because people are coming in and out of your house, and
Mhm.
toilet paper and tissues. Thank you. So then
Yeah.
bringing things that you guys needed, just in and
Mhm.
out.
Yeah, and they were so great. They even went with us. They recommended a funeral home, and then our the pastor went with us to the funeral home and just helped make sure that everything was laid out. They actually did, I forgot about this. They did the night that they found him, so it was Wednesday, so the morning. Wednesday night, they did like a prayer vigil, and basically people from like all over the community, people in our church, they just got together and sang some songs, prayed, and whatever. And we actually, my husband and I, we ended up going. I don't know how I even made it there, and um, so that was great. And then we had his memorial service, and again, my church just like planned the whole thing,
Mm.
and they were again there when he got buried. About a week later, he got buried in the small town I mentioned earlier, Cascade, where my husband grew up, because that's where my husband's grandfather was buried. It's not something you really think about, right? Like, where am I going to bury my kid? So we didn't really have any family plot on my side of the family here. So when I asked my husband, he was very quiet about a lot of things. Obviously, feeling struggling, and so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't making all the decisions, and the only thing that he really had an opinion about was where he was buried, and that's why we chose Cascade. So um, they've just, yeah, there was just like a huge support system from our church, and they've been there for the last almost 5 years. So
What
I
was
guess
the
we're
date? What was the date of his passing?
August 1st, 2017. So we're coming up to almost 4 years.
Mm. And it seems like an eternity, and at the same time, it seems like yesterday.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
yeah, totally.
Hmm. Like so much has happened since, because now you've had two children since you were expecting, then you had another one as well. And so that makes it seem like time, you kind of see time right in them. And then for you, and I can relate to this aspect of having a child near. My sister and I are 6 weeks apart with our first two as well. So, how has it been for you seeing all of Ellie's milestones
Mm,
since she's 2 months different from Mason?
yeah, that has been, oof, hard for
Yes.
sure. Um, I mean, obviously she's her own person, and I try to make it very clear that I'm not like upset that she's growing up. Um, but definitely for the first little while, so my sister-in-law was again pregnant at the same time as me. So we both had, Mason and Ellie, and then I was pregnant with Noah, she was pregnant with Gabriel, and then,
Oh,
Mason
wow.
died. So she actually told me, I think it was like a week or two after he had died, that she was pregnant also. And our due dates again were like really close together.
This is
Um,
like crazy. I'm like chills and
I
stuff. That
know.
And I know you
Yeah,
said
this
that
was my
you
life.
plan everything. I know you said that you plan like that you've planned the pregnancy, but you never like sat down with your brother and sister-in-law and said,
Yeah,
"Hey,
like,
are
let's do
you
it
guys?"
again.
No, it was just like, wow.
Yeah. So on top of, already being pregnant and having those crazy emotions and stuff,
Hmm.
it was always really hard, especially when she had her second birthday. I honestly couldn't even go, so I didn't. And obviously that was hard, and I regret not being there, but I know that if I had gone, it would have just been a hot mess. So but it's, yeah, every time I'd see her, I was, I always had this thought like, oh, that's what Mason would be doing now, or that's how he would be talking, and these are the skills that he would have, learning to speak in full sentences. I mean, I never even got to hear him say I love you,
Mm-hmm.
because he was just 19 months.
Mm-hmm.
And not even to put all the pressure on Ellie, just even having my own, like Noah, who's 3 now, and Everett is also older than Mason ever was. So just having them reach those milestones and pass them, it's hard.
Because Everett is how old? So Noah is now 4, almost 4,
Noah's 3. He just turned 3 in
3. Oh,
February.
okay, 3. Okay, because you were okay. And then Everett is 2 then?
He's 20 months.
Oh, he just passed that
Yeah, last month in
last month. And
March.
as
He
we're
just
recording
passed
this, yeah.
Mason.
I always say as I we're recording this, because as I tell people, like my release of my dates of my podcasts are sometimes a couple of months sometimes after I've had the conversation. So in the
Gotcha.
time of us recording, then it's 20 months. Everett's 20 months and Noah's 3 years
Yeah.
old. Wow, yeah, seeing all of that is just a constant reminder. And again, it's not that there's no like you said, it can be a combination of the joy and also the reminder, of course, of the milestones you missed with Mason that you think
Yeah.
about. Um, Now, how was it for you then? You're pregnant, getting this news. Did you end up having to go get checked in the for the doctor for your pregnancy during that time when things like that? Like, did you contact your doctor to let them know you had just experienced something hard? Did they have to
Yeah.
monitor you and so forth too? Or was it more you kind of just keeping a check on what was going on with you and your body and your pregnancy?
Yeah, I actually had an appointment like the following week, I think was just one of my normal checkups. And I I think they already knew because it was not really a small town, but because he was a missing person and a missing child the night before, it just spread all over Nampa that, his name. And I think somebody put the connection together. And so when I went in for my appointment, they were just, obviously very solemn and understanding. And I told them, I was concerned because I was pregnant and whatever. And I don't think they necessarily did anything any different, but they were definitely aware that I
Mhm.
was also grieving. And luckily, Noah was healthy and the pregnancy and everything went great. It just, um, I was just a grieving mom instead of
Mhm.
a mama.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, but it is important because since emotions can have all these, different effects in our body. Since we're talking about that, what are
Yeah.
some of the things? This is what we were talking just prior to recording, that have come up in your body, that you know for you knowing, and you knowing doesn't mean somebody else has to prove that this is right or not. It's you as Kristina, the
Yeah.
intuitive human that you are. Um, what's come up in the grief in your grief in your body,
Yeah.
reflected in
So
your body.
we've talked about this a little bit on our podcast, but Stephanie and I didn't really make the connection as much until we both started talking to each other about it, but we both have liver issues. And one of the things that my mom and other people have also said was like, oh, you processed your grief in your liver. That's probably why you're struggling with this. And I don't really think I didn't think until I had a really serious medical situation that I had anything wrong with my liver. Um, but in March of 2020, I was in the hospital for 8 days due to liver failure. And they didn't know this until at the end of the 8 days. So basically, it's called encephalopathy, but my brain was basically shutting down because of all the toxins that were overwhelming my body because my liver wasn't processing them. And so I basically just one morning just didn't, like, I was awake, but my brain wasn't working. And so my mom was, and I was breastfeeding Everett. He
Oh
was
my
6 months old.
gosh.
And so my mom was like doing all the work, like feeding the baby, like hooking him up and like trying to give me fluids. And I was just not really responding. And so once it came to be about lunchtime, my mom called my husband, was like, you need to take her to the hospital. And so they tested me for drug overdose and acetaminophen overdose, like alcohol, like all this stuff. Like, why is this girl? I was 31. Like, why is she not responding? Why is she like this? And so I was in the hospital in Nampa for a day, and they sent me to Meridian for a day, and then they life flighted me to Utah because they're like, this is a 31-year-old super healthy person, and she's like something's really really wrong. And so they sent me. They knew it was my liver at that point, but they didn't really know why. So they
Mm.
sent me to Utah, and I was there for another 5 days. So, anyways, long story short, turns out I have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease, and then also, we have the theory that obviously you process your grief in your liver, and maybe that has something to do with it. But there's just all these health repercussions, like physical things that can happen um, while you're grieving, and I think your body is just responding to this overwhelming mental state that you're in, and your body physically reacts. And I don't really know what it means that you process your grief in your liver, but I'm guessing it means it's working overtime because mine is now basically dead because it doesn't work. So I survive on medication and I'm getting by. Um, yeah, it's grief is not something you mess with.
No, and the fact too, I wonder if the fact that you were pregnant too during that time, like if it just didn't really fully allow you to process it those those 9 months of pregnancy as well, to really Does it make sense what I'm saying? Like if you really
Yeah.
got it out as some, not,
Your
I mean,
body
grief
was
doesn't
so
go to
focused on doing something else, growing a human. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, who knows?
Well,
Who
and then
knows?
to be pregnant, I mean, my two that are alive, Noah and Everett, are only 17 months apart. So
That's a
I
lot.
was barely healed from one, and I decided to have another one because, and I explain this because in my head, I feel like I have to, like, they were so close, why'd you do that? But when I got pregnant with Noah, we had made the decision to have a second child. And so when he died, and what we had was Noah, in my mind, I'm like, I'm counting the time. Like, we were ready for two. Like, it's time to have two. So basically, as soon as I felt the kick in the pants, like, we did it and we got pregnant again. And that's why Noah and Everett are so close together. I just
Mhm.
had this nagging feeling that I was supposed to have two. And so I did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah, you never know like what causes what in terms of your body's, process, and if it was the two pregnancy, if it was the grief, whatever it was, or something else. But um again, we're also trying to fill in the blanks here of this mysteriousness of you at 31 going through that. It's like then you wonder, like, because so many people have these undiagnosed, no, or get diagnosed of things that you're like, but why, like, why, like, there's, you don't find the rhyme or
yeah.
reason. And sometimes all we have to do is maybe just look in with either within or in our emotions and in our history of what it is we haven't processed. Who knows? Like, I do feel like there's our bodies are so connected in different ways, emotionally and mentally,
Hmm.
mentally, spiritually, and physically. It's all part of a whole that when something's just not right, something else, it's like a wheel in a car,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like you can drive a car with three wheels for a little bit. So,
So what I think happened, because I've thought a lot about this, because if you know anything about celiac disease, and probably you don't, but there are a lot of symptoms of it, and most of them you're pretty aware when you have it, when you have celiac. There's lots of GI issues, and
mhm,
you're
mhm,
going to be going to the doctor trying to figure out what's going on.
mhm,
I didn't have any of that. Like, I haven't. I know for a fact I haven't had celiac my whole life. So when I've done the research, autoimmune things can be triggered by trauma. And so when I think back to, like, when my symptoms and everything started, I know exactly what did it, because we had just decided towards the end of last year, so in 2019, that we were going to leave our dream home.
mm,
And so we decided to put my house, and my parents decided to put their house up for sale. And so we sold our house first. And so I had this emotional trauma again of, like, leaving this house that we had built for Mason, basically, because as soon as we found out he was coming, that's when my parents were like, oh, we got to do this now, like, it's got to be ready for you. So when they built our house, it's actually kind of a cool story. We watched it pretty much the whole way because it was right next door to my parents. So we watched it being, built from the ground up. And our same church family I always talk about, when we had all the studs up, they came over and we wrote Bible verses and happy
mm,
sayings and stuff all over the 2x4s, the frame of the house. And so we knew which room was Mason's, and they wrote stuff over Mason's doors. So thinking about that, like, leaving that house was hard, like, really hard. And so we ended up moving next door to my parents for about a month until, um, we saved up enough money and we were going to buy a house. Well, so this is January, we decide to sell it. February it sells and we move. And I was in the hospital for 8 days in
March.
March.
Yeah. That's like
Yeah.
a lot in a little period of time. The emotional component of leaving it though, um, was that less than the emotional component of staying because of what it meant for you to be near that? Was that part of the reason you guys decided to move, was because of what it reminded you of?
Yeah, I wrote a really long post on Facebook kind of explaining it to the world, if you
Mhm.
want, because I felt like people were like, "Why are you moving? This is your forever home," you know? And so I felt like I needed to explain myself. So obviously it was very sentimental, and
Mhm.
um, we had a lot of reasons for staying, but the reasons weren't there anymore.
Mhm.
And the reminder of what killed my son was. So for me, I can't speak for my husband, but for me, when I would go outside, we still had the same beautiful backyard. We still had our mason tree that has yellow leaves in the fall that people bought for us, and we still had the yellow cornfields in the backyard. But I couldn't see past. I saw past that, and all I could see was the creek that was still there, and it was just too much. Like the pain that brought was more overwhelming than the joy that once was there. So we decided to move forward. I don't want to say move on, but we decided to open a new chapter, and I'm so glad we did. Like I miss that house. We still drive by it because it's not very far from us. Um, and those sayings are still written on the studs in that house, but it's not about the objects. Like that's not Mason, and I still have the same memories whether I live in that house or not. But I have so much more joy on a day-to-day basis, knowing my kids are safe here, and that's what matters. We talk about that in one of our episodes about being a mom to children here as well as in heaven. And I really have to focus on my kids that are here. It doesn't mean I don't miss Mason any less, but leaving there was a good decision and a good thing for, I think, all of our mental health and their physical well-being.
Thank you for sharing that. And I really didn't know that I was going to be asking you so much about all the different intrinsities, and that's not the word. I don't know how to say that, pronounce that, intrinsicity. I never
I
know
know
how
what
to,
you're trying to say,
you
but
know what I'm trying to say, you know what, all the details. Let me just leave
yeah,
it simple, not try to be all,
intricate,
fancy,
intricates.
intricate. Thank
Yeah,
you, intricate. Thank
intricacy.
you, intricacies. I know sometimes, like I make up words. I tell people, like with Spanish and English being the two languages I grew up with, I end up making up language, words in either
Yeah,
one, and I think that they
yeah,
exist. Or sometimes I struggle to then, you know, create them because I'm like, is that a word or not? So
yeah. I
thank
get
you
it.
for going into the
Intricate
details and
details.
yes, because I think that that's important for people to hear, because um the what you said about the house itself not being what is the what is going to just hold the memories of Mason. You always will have them regardless of where
Yeah.
you are, even if you move to another state, everything. It doesn't have to be about those things. That's important, because sometimes we do hold on to objects so long, because we have that feeling that if we let go, it's as if we're letting go of the person as
Mm-hmm.
well. So thank you for sharing that, because that is important. Now let's move into what kind of support you found, because this is how you met Steffanie. So
Yeah.
what kind of grief support you started in, and then what kind of grief support you then created, and all the things that you do now to navigate this grief journey that is ongoing. So share
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah. So Steffanie actually was one of the first people to reach out to my mom and myself. And she had just lost Joshua in March of the same year. So 5 months later is when Mason died. And so people were reaching out to her because they're like, hey, you might want to talk to this girl. Her son just died almost the same way your son did. So she messaged me and my mom on Facebook. And at the time, I was getting an overwhelming amount of messages from people I didn't know either, because they were like, I saw your story. Because, like I said, it was kind of widespread because he was a missing child. And then they saw that he died. So everybody and their dog was reaching out to me. And so anyways, I saw her message and was something that I just kind of put on the back burner, and I was like, I'll deal with that later. So I think it was at least a couple weeks, if not months, down the road when I decided that I was ready to find her message again, because she's talked about maybe going to a support group, and that she was a similar grieving mom in the same situation. And so I reached out to her and we started talking, and honestly, our friendship just grew from there because we were both in such this same exact emotional state. And maybe even a little worse for her, but because she talks about how that 5 month period, she didn't have a me, she didn't have somebody that reached out right at the beginning. So me having her right off the bat was a blessing for sure. And it would be, 10 o'clock at night, and I'd be scrolling through Pinterest, reading all these sad quotes and crying to myself. And then I would message Steffanie, and she'd be crying with me. And I don't know why I'm so emotional today. Well, I do know it's because I'm pregnant, but
Oh,
so
oh,
anyways.
by the time I
Oh, I
release,
forgot you hadn't told that yet.
I haven't, but by the time I
No,
release this episode, you would have already maybe
probably
shared
no.
with the world. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's all good. I hadn't shared yet. It's all good.
Anyways, spilled my own beans. So Steffi and I we just kicked it off right off the bat, and I think it was May of 2018, because I was coming up to my 1 year anniversary of his death, and Stephanie had just passed hers, and we decided to go to a local support group, which is actually a nationwide group. It's called the Compassionate Friends, and there was a local chapter in Boise that we decided to go to together. And we did that. They have a meeting every month. We did that for a few months, and then it's kind of sad. Like the chapter just kind of started to fall apart. Like the leadership was, somebody was retiring and somebody was leaving, and the main person who's in charge was just like, it's too much for you right now. And so they asked Stephanie and I if we wanted to be in charge, and I was like, Stephanie, I can't. So she took over at first. She was the chapter leader, and then about a year later, she was like, I can't do this anymore. So I'm like, well, I'll help you. So we're technically the co-leaders of this group, but with COVID and everything, we weren't able to meet in person anymore. So this is now 2020, and I've been charged kind of for a year, and we're like, well, what do we do? We can't meet in person. So we talked about doing Zoom meetings, or do we just like record something and share it? And so we decided to just talk, because that's what we do. We would just talk. And so we kind of put together like this little outline, and we decided to go live on Facebook. And it was actually like we're trying to keep within like a 20-minute period. We ended up talking for 45 minutes. So if you've seen our first podcast episode, it's 45 minutes long. And we were just talking about, I think it was grief in the holidays, I think was our first one, or preparing for the holidays. And people were like, wow, you guys are awesome. Like, you should have a podcast. And we were like, what? No. So we started talking about it, and you're like, this isn't too hard. This is just what we do anyways. We just talk and get our feelings out. And so that's what started Sunflowers and Red Feathers. So
Wow, amazing. So
yeah.
from being in the support group, from it kind of starting to fall apart, from you guys taking, kind of leadership of that chapter,
Mm-hmm.
to then COVID, then that ended up, creating then your online platform of now your podcast, and
Mm-hmm.
people can find it on YouTube and so forth as well. Now, tell us now the meaning behind the name Sunflower and Red Feathers of the podcast.
Yeah. So my special color for Mason is yellow. That kind of represents, like the joy. And there's actually a little bit more to it. When they wanted to know what colors to decorate for his memorial, like what was his favorite color, I'm like, he was 19 months old. He didn't have a favorite color. And my mom chimes in, and she goes, he always wants the yellow sippy cup at daycare. I bet his favorite color
Mm.
was yellow. So that's where we kind of, from there, we decided to wear yellow to his memorial. Like my entire family all wore yellow, and it's just kind of become his color. It represents him, and it just so happens that it also was the color that represents joy. So it just
Mm.
went together. And Stephanie's color for Joshua was red. She loved red roses, and he loved Roman knights. And the Roman knight's helmet has like the red feather plumes. And
Because
so
Stephanie's son Joshua was a little older. He was
he
five,
was 5. Yeah, he was
five
5
when
when
he
he died.
passed. Yeah.
Yeah, so almost ready to go to kindergarten, and loved everything about Rome. So when we were talking about the podcast thing, she's like, "Oh, we can name it Yellow Sippy Cups and Red Feathers." I'm like, "Oh, that's so cute," And then I'm like, but one of the things that also has come to represent, obviously it's a flower's yellow, a sunflower's yellow. I'm like,
Yeah,
well, what
there's
about?
sunflowers behind her, by the way. That's why she's
Yeah, oh
right
yeah,
now, because I'm not videoing, recording. So yeah,
yeah.
there's
There's sunflowers behind me.
sunflowers
Um,
behind.
Yeah, so I'm like, well, what about like sunflowers and red feathers? And they're both objects, but not like yellow sippy cup is so long.
Mhm.
And she's like, I love it. So that's how we got sunflowers and
Perfect.
red feathers.
So perfect. So every time you see a sunflower, you think of him too
Oh
now,
yeah,
like we associate that. Do you start
yeah.
seeing then hers being red feathers? Do you get any type of messages? Do you feel any connections, little messages that you get?
For me,
Yes, for
from the
you.
sunflowers.
Or if sunflowers
Oh
or any other way, what are your ways of connecting to Mason?
yeah, dandelions are actually also, it was kind of more of a dandelion before it was
Yes.
sunflowers because we did family pictures in May of
Mm,
2017 before he died that August. So he had been like 15 months old or something. And he is the firstborn in both sides of the family, first grandchild. And so it's like my parents, my husband and I, my sister and her husband, and Mason. And so we're all like perfectly posed, taking these pictures. And then there's my little 15-month-old like running around. And we're like, smile, no stop, no cheese, like trying to get him to be good for pictures. And the photographer was like, oh, here, give him a dandelion. So we have these super adorable pictures of like me holding Mason on my hip, like blowing the dandelion seeds off into the breeze. And there's one of my mom holding him like that, and they're so precious to
mm.
us. And so dandelions and seeds are actually something that's really
Oh, I see that.
sentimental to us. So yeah,
She's
dandelions.
showing me
My
a
tattoo.
tattoo on her shoulder as I'm saying, "Oh."
Yeah.
I
Um, so yeah, yellow, dandelions, sunflowers, anything yellow, really. I've never had so much yellow in my wardrobe in my life. Like I'm not really am a yellow person. I wasn't
until
until
now.
2017.
And
Yeah.
now what in your faith, what has helped you in that connection as well with your grief? How has your faith played a part in your grief journey?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I
In
mean,
your
it's not
connection
hard, but
in your
it's definitely
connection
changed.
to yeah,
Yeah.
in your connection to source, creator, God.
Yeah. I think people's religion, I'm not, that's a bad way to say it, but like when somebody dies, everybody's instinct is to say, I'm praying for you, or, they're in a better place. And I think people, when they think of death, that's when they start to think about religion,
Mm,
sometimes if they haven't really thought of it before. And so coming from a person who is a Christian and believes in heaven and, all of that, when somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, now he's an angel," or God needed him more, or something like that can be really hurtful because, like, my mom explained it the best way to me. She's like, "God doesn't need anything. God didn't need Mason. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't take him back because he needed his help per se." And so for me, like, I was really angry. Like, well, then why did you take him? Like, why would he do that? So at first, like, that was really hard for me to wrap my mind around. And then it's one of those things where it's like you have so many questions that are going to go unanswered, and you can get so frustrated and so upset about not getting them answered that can really be hurtful to you and your healing. And so I got to this place where it's just like, you know what? I can't change the fact that he's gone, and I'm never going to understand why he's gone. So I realized that I needed to just be able to find peace and joy another way. And for me, that was realizing that I get to see him again. And yeah, I have to live this life without him, and it's going to be hard sometimes. But the ultimate joy comes from the fact that I will get to see him again, and this is not forever.
just that aspect of faith, of that holding on to that part of faith for you, of the knowing that you'll be reconnected, um,
Yeah,
is what holds on in your grief. And you just explained it so beautifully too, that sometimes faith can be tested, right, in these moments of trials and difficulties, and the why, and the
yeah,
fact that you were still able to be at peace with that, and knowing that there are going to be some questions that are not going to have answers, and just hold on to the part that you do know,
yeah,
has really been the fact. And that is just so wise, and just so, yeah, wise. That's the best way I can think of saying that. I was gonna say mature, but if you are mature, you're a mom. It's like if I was
yeah.
talking to like a 10-year-old, they'd be like, "That's so mature for your age." Would be
Oh, thank
telling
you.
somebody that is another fellow mom here, so mature.
You could
But
say
yeah,
mature in your
it
grief journey because that,
does.
infers that I've come from somewhere and
Yeah, that's true.
learned along the
Yeah,
way. Yeah,
that's true. Okay, so matured in your grief journey. That thank you. That does in at least in that comprehension, and that's helped you have that belief
Yeah,
to
and I
hold
really do
on to
believe
that.
that. There's
Mhm.
definitely mindsets that have changed a lot over time. And even just doing our podcast interviews, talking with other people who have also had those epiphanies, if you will,
Yes.
like realizations that there's something that they can't change. And one of the things that I've really noticed a theme with all of, especially bereaved parents, is that they, the ones that are doing, I'll say, well mentally and emotionally now, have all been people that have taken their grief and done something beautiful with it.
And
Like
when
they
she said
started
well,
foundations and
you did the little quotes, air quotes with the well, because it's true. It's like the air
yeah,
quote well. You're so right, because it's kind of like you create a purpose. I've heard that a lot of times that turning pain into purpose and those kind of
yeah,
things. And it's the aspect of getting this or lemons to lemonade, have it, that when you take those
exactly.
opportunities of doing something then that adds value to somebody else, even amidst your own pain, it does shift your focus and your perspective in that journey. And um, what are some of these things that you've learned maybe from your own um, interviews that you've had that have also added to your own uh, grief journey of arsenal of maybe tools and such that maybe you've heard another person say and you're like, oh, journaling, for example, I'm just examining, oh, that would work for me, or meditation. Oh, I'm going to add this. Is there something that you've
Yeah.
added based on any conversations that you've had with your guests, or are they things that in general you already did?
You know, a lot of them honestly have been things that we've already done. I think the things that naturally you learn about yourself when you're grieving, people are kind of all already drawn to that. I don't know, like you learn things about grief and you learn how to get through them. But I guess some people maybe need to be told. Like grief journaling, for example, was a good one because we just did an interview with the bereavement counselor that's in the UK, and she made some really good points about like what kind of things to journal about, and there are things that I hadn't really thought of, things to do that can help you process like a day on a day to day. Like I see a sunflower and it makes me think of Mason. So if I find a sunflower in a magazine and put that, on there and write about, why did that make you think of Mason and how do you, if it makes you sad, like what about it makes you sad? Like you take an emotion or a feeling and you really dig down into it and figure out why if you need to. But I guess for me, I didn't really feel like that was helpful. I don't know. Most of the things that we've talked to people about, like starting foundations in honor of their children and, just having the special things that represent them, like colors and objects, doing things like that, are all things that I guess we've kind of already, but for me, like I feel like we've already accomplished. We have done so much in memory of Mason and in honor of Mason, and I think that's one of the reasons why Steffanie and I have so many followers is because I think we have a lot of good ideas that people like to hear. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to say we have it all figured out because, oh my gosh, I totally don't. And I think that's probably one of my struggles is like, I think I mentioned this one time before, is you have to be ready mentally and emotionally to hear somebody else's story to be able to actually get something from it. And I think for me personally, I've been a little shut down and like closed off emotionally for a while. So maybe that's my problem. Maybe I'm not listening. But again, you have to be ready. And I'm not
Mhm.
forcing myself. And I know I will be at some point. So that was a
That's
long
so
way to answer that.
interesting. No, you know what you just said, that you're probably not even, that you're not maybe even listening, even though you interview people, you're gathering information, but truly, truly, are you listening in your own grief journey about it? Like, it's so
Yeah.
interesting that we sometimes can still even go through the motions on certain things in our life as that protective mechanism. And like you said, it's really only till we're ready that we
Hmm.
maybe really truly listen. Even just like
Yeah.
somebody might not want to use the tool of listening to any of our podcasts as their way of as a grief tool, because
Hmm.
they're not ready. And
Exactly.
when they do find it, it will be the right time and
Yep.
place for them and their journey. And maybe this is not the tool. This is not the tool, and that's okay too.
I think it's just not necessarily my tool. You kind of hit it on
Mhm,
the head when you said earlier that now that you do podcasts, you don't necessarily listen to podcasts as much. And podcasts have never really been my thing. We
mhm,
started Sunflowers and Red Feathers to help other people.
mhm, mhm.
So it's not necessarily like a tool that I think I would
You
use to help myself.
It's
But
so interesting, right? But yet we're
yeah,
providing it for others. Yeah, like I
yeah,
listen to podcasts, but it's not how I processed I didn't look for grief podcasts when I was going through grief journey.
yeah,
Actually, I didn't even know they existed because that's why I
exactly.
even
Yeah.
created one. Um,
So
until like
my process, my tool is definitely Steffanie.
And I love when you said that you would go onto Pinterest to find, like, quotes that would make
Oh
you
yeah.
feel, right? You actually
Hmm.
wanted to connect to those emotions and cry, like, doing that
Yeah.
purposeful, intentional, like, sitting down with your grief and then calling your friend that understood exactly where you were at. That
Hmm.
was that was
It
perfect.
wasn't on purpose either. It's just, you wanted something to explain the way that you were feeling, and so I would just go through and quotes were it for me. Like, oh yeah, I feel that. Oh, it really
Mm,
hurts. That really hits the spot. And sometimes I would share them. Sometimes I would just save them. Sometimes I'd put them in newsletters that I send out for the compassionate friends, down the road. But yeah, most of the time it was just for my own sake, just to cry it out and put words to my emotions. And
mm.
yeah,
That is just beautiful. Thank you. It's so simple too. Like, it was a simple tool, but you also had your sounding board, another fellow
yeah.
mom that kind of got where you were at, was in the same kind of place as you were, in your grief journey. I'm going to ask you, a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. How was the dynamic of the grief journey, um, with you and Wade? Of course, everybody knows everybody grieves differently. So, how did you guys navigate that journey of each of you, your different ways of grieving in your
Mm.
marriage and in your relationship? And now, also, if you can also add to that, how you now share Mason with Noah and Everett as well, how you share his memory and his life with them, since they never got to meet to their brother.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard one, especially the first one.
Okay.
So for the main difference in my story and Stephanie's story is I didn't know what happened right away with Mason, because he was with my husband and brother-in-law and father, and my husband was obviously in the water with him, trying to find him. So, and for Stephanie, she was the one who was in the water trying to save Joshua. So they have that in common, which has been another blessing for me being able to bounce stuff off of Stephanie. But one of the things that I will say is that I have never once blamed my husband. I've never said, I can't believe you did that. How did you let that happen? I have never said those words to him at all. And that is a very mindful thing because I never wanted to put that blame on him and I never wanted him to carry that burden because he already is carrying such a huge burden. And I think that was wise, but I also think that I took it to an extreme that was a little hurtful for our relationship because I didn't I don't know, I didn't have any way to talk to him about it. I didn't know how to talk to him about it. And so that put up this huge wall and this barrier of we just don't talk about it. We just don't talk about Mason. And like the first few months, if not year, it was just like this elephant in the room. Like
Mm,
once we started finding happiness again and we were able to like have relationships again and get out of the house, like that was our getaway and we would do that, live, and then we'd come back home and not talk.
mm,
And that was our survival mode. Like it was really just a survival mode. And so we got to this part, and I've never really shared this with anybody, but we finally got to this part in our life where I was just like, you know what? I made the decision to live, and I made the decision to live with you. And if you can't do that, then we need to figure this out. And we just had this like heart to heart. I never have made him explain anything. I still never blamed him for anything, and he just was like, okay. And it just I'm not gonna say it fixed because we still have never really had a conversation about what happened, but he now knows that, I don't blame him and blaming him is not gonna change anything and that I still love him unconditionally because I choose to and he's my husband. Um, and I think just having that understanding has kind of filled in the gaps, I guess, and kind of fixed that cracked foundation that maybe he was questioning. So, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms I'm sure we could try to delve into, but I think just that conversation of us just like having that heart to heart and being like, I want to live. Do you want to live with me? Kind of was like a deciding factor. So, and as far as like our children go, so I didn't have any other kids that were alive when Mason died. So having these two being born after, I didn't really know how to like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you introduce them to death and grief and
Mm-hmm.
a brother that they've never seen. And Steffanie, when Joshua died, had his two little brothers alive. And so I've had, again, a blessing. Steffanie is just a huge blessing in my life of seeing how she was able to raise them and still talk about Joshua. And I remember the first time that we really hung out together after Noah was born and walking around and stuff. We went to the park and she had at that point her two that were alive, and she had a son soon after, or actually he was born right before Noah. So they're both three now. And so they were all playing together. And one of the first things that her oldest son after Joshua said was, "Oh, you're Mason's mommy." And like, "Oh, this is Mason's brother." And I was totally blown away, like how forward he was about talking about Mason. I'm like, how does he know who Mason is? And Stephanie was just like it was just normal day-to-day conversation talking about Mason and Joshua. And I was so blown away by that. And I finally realized I was like, I need to start telling Noah about Mason. And then Everett was born and now Noah's 3, and he kind of is starting to understand that there's a different little boy in those pictures and that's not him, or it's not little brother. And so I'm not gonna say I haven't mastered yet because I really have no idea what I'm doing, but being able to watch Steffanie raise her kids and talk about Joshua and Mason has been very helpful. And now Noah can look at a picture and be like, "Oh, that's big brother Mason." But I know at some point he's going to get confused because that kid is only 19 months old and he's obviously not older than him. So there's still a lot of explaining to do, and if I master it, I'll tell you, but
And you
that's
may
it.
and you might not. Do we ever really truly master parenting? No. And so
Ugh,
even right?
yeah,
So even with this, like even more, it's an added component of this journey. Like we say, we don't come with kids don't come with a manual, and these kind of
yeah,
experiences we're kind of learning as we're going. And yes, like your situation is even more unique than in terms of Steffanie. Already the kids have some recollection of somebody having been in the family, but
yeah,
Noah and Everett were not even born. So it's like, yeah, and
yeah,
the age right now, 3 and 20 months, like, yeah, you don't know. So
hmm,
you'll kind of navigate that as you go, uh and I'm sure it will be perfect because yeah, perfect and perfectly imperfect because it's
perfectly
still you
imperfect. Yep.
perfectly imperfect because it's whatever you choose as a family of how it is you want to introduce, Mason into their
Hmm.
lives or not. If somebody chooses not to, that's also their choice. And that's still the perfectly imperfect for that family's dynamic. If that ever
Yeah.
becomes a choice in somebody else's life too, that is what it is. And you respect, we all have to respect what people choose to do with their grief too, because
Yes.
it is
Exactly.
so unique. And so okay, let's before we wrap up now, tell us then website name, because that would be probably the best way to find everything to do with Sunflower and Red Feathers and connect with you ladies. So
Yeah.
can you please say it? Hey, of course, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. So I honestly don't even think I could quote our website. It's called it's like a flow page. But basically if you go to our Instagram, there's
Okay, that would
a
be easier.
URL link.
That's better.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's like flowcode.com/sunflowers and red feathers. So don't try to memorize
So
it or
that is
anything.
harder. You're right.
Yeah.
Just
So
go,
you just
yeah, just click on the links
go to
below that I'll give
Instagram.
or
Yeah, go
Instagram.
to Instagram and click on the URL there. And basically, what it is just, it's one website that has everything. So all of our podcast sites, YouTube, our blog, and everything, Facebook is all individual buttons on that URL. So just go to one URL, choose what platform you like, and you'll find
And then
us.
go from there. And it's at Sunflower and Red Feathers, and is it the word AND for Instagram or
Sunflowers and red feathers, all
yeah,
written out, all
out
lowercase. Yep.
perfect. So that way
Yep.
people can find you, guys, and of course I'll put the links. Any other words you'd like to say to the listeners? Any things that I did not ask that you'd like, oh, when I hang up, I don't want to not having said this?
Oh man, I don't know. We've said a lot. Basically, just know that wherever you are in your journey, you are in the right place. And just, it's all about finding community, whether that be locally or online. Just find other bereaved parents, other people that are in your situation, because that's how you can connect and know that you're not alone. It's all about connection.
Thank you so much, Kristina.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.